On June 21, 1788, the United States Constitution crossed the line between proposal and government. The decisive vote did not happen in Philadelphia, where the document had been drafted, or in New York, where national politics would soon gather. It happened in New Hampshire, inside a ratifying convention where delegates weighed fear, exhaustion, ambition, and uncertainty after years of weak union. When New Hampshire became the ninth state to ratify, Article 7 was satisfied. A new federal framework could begin among the states that accepted it. That sentence can sound simple: ninth state ratifies, Constitution takes effect. But the moment was not simple to the people living through it. The United States under the Articles of Confederation had won independence, yet victory had left a fragile political machine. Congress could request money but could not reliably collect it. Trade disputes divided states. Foreign powers doubted American credit. Soldiers and creditors waited for payment. Western settlement raised questions about land, security, and sovereignty. Shays' rebellion in Massachusetts had recently shown how debt, taxation, and state authority could erupt into armed resistance. Many Americans wanted repair. Many also feared that repair would become a new version of distant power. The Philadelphia Convention of 1787 produced a plan far stronger than a mere revision of the Articles. It created a president, a bicameral Congress, federal courts, powers to tax and regulate commerce, and a supremacy clause tying state and federal authority into a new hierarchy. Supporters argued that only an energetic national government could preserve the Revolution's gains. Opponents warned that the proposed government might swallow the states, burden farmers with taxes, create an aristocratic Senate, command a standing army, and threaten liberties because the draft contained no Bill of Rights. Ratification therefore became a public political campaign. Pamphlets, newspaper essays, tavern debates, town meetings, church conversations, and convention speeches turned constitutional design into a national argument. Federalists, including Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay in the essays later known as the Federalist, defended the plan as a controlled republic with checks, balances, representation, and divided powers. Anti-Federalists answered that distance, taxation, executive power, and federal courts could become tools of domination. They did not all oppose union. Many demanded amendments before surrendering so much authority. Article 7 set the rule. The Constitution would take effect when 9 states ratified it, but only among the states that joined. That threshold mattered. It avoided the impossible requirement of unanimous approval under the Articles, but it also meant the new government could begin while some states remained outside. Delaware, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Georgia, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Maryland, and South Carolina had already ratified before New Hampshire's convention reached its decision. The count stood at 8. One more state would turn the plan into a functioning constitutional order. New Hampshire's first convention had not rushed to approval. Delegates met in February 1788, and opposition was strong enough that the convention adjourned without ratifying. That delay shows why the final result should not be remembered as automatic. Local concerns mattered. Delegates and citizens asked how a distant federal government would treat taxation, debt, militia power, religion, trial by jury, and amendments. They knew they were not merely praising a founding document. They were deciding whether to bind their state to a new structure of authority. When the convention met again in June, the national picture had changed. Federalist organizers understood the arithmetic. The 9th ratification would carry symbolic and legal force across the continent. Supporters pushed hard, but they also accepted the political need for recommended amendments. That was one of the crucial compromises of the ratification struggle. The Constitution might be adopted first, while states proposed changes that would later protect speech, religion, arms, juries, due process, and other liberties. The promise of amendments helped make ratification possible in places where distrust of consolidated power ran deep. On June 21, New Hampshire ratified by a narrow margin. The vote made it the 9th state. News of the decision moved by writer, printer, letter, and rumor through a country where political information traveled at the speed of roads and coastal shipping. For supporters, it was a triumph. The experiment could begin. For opponents, it was not the end of the argument. Virginia and New York had not yet ratified, and both were essential to any stable union. North Carolina and Rhode Island would remain outside at first. The constitutional map was not complete, but the threshold had been crossed. The stakes were immediate. Without Virginia, the new government would lack one of the largest and most influential states. Without New York, it would be awkwardly separated geographically and politically, and the city that was serving as the Confederation Congress's seat might stand outside the new system. In Virginia, James Madison and other supporters faced Patrick Henry, George Mason, and critics who demanded stronger guarantees of liberty. In New York, Hamilton and his allies fought a difficult battle against skepticism. New Hampshire's vote gave Federalists momentum, but it did not erase the pressure for amendments or the fear that the new government could become too powerful. The Confederation Congress then had to translate ratification into machinery. It set procedures for choosing electors, holding congressional elections, and assembling the first federal government. This was where constitutional theory became calendars, ballots, buildings, offices, oaths, and records. The new Congress would meet in 1789. George Washington would be elected the first president. Departments, courts, revenue systems, and diplomatic routines would have to be created almost from scratch. A document could authorize a government, but people had to build one. Bill of Rights became the next major checkpoint. James Madison, who had initially doubted the necessity of a Bill of Rights, recognized the political and constitutional importance of amendments after ratification. In 1789, the first Congress proposed amendments drawn from state recommendations and public pressure. 10 were ratified in 1791. They did not solve every problem in American constitutional life, and they did not protect everyone equally in practice. Enslaved people, native nations, women, propertyless men in many settings, and many religious or racial minorities experienced the new republic through exclusion, coercion, or limited rights. But the amendments show how anti-federalist pressure shaped the government that Federalists had fought to launch. That is why New Hampshire's ratification deserves more attention than a date on a timeline. It reveals the Constitution as a contested settlement, not a sacred object descending fully accepted from Philadelphia. It shows a political culture trying to balance fear of disorder against fear of centralized power. It shows citizens debating whether liberty needed a stronger union or protection from that union. It also shows that compromise could be procedural. Adopt now, amend next, and let the first government prove whether the design could survive. The uncertainty did not vanish after June 21st. Americans still had to learn whether federal taxation would be accepted, whether state loyalty would coexist with national authority, whether courts would command respect, whether parties would form despite warnings against faction, and whether Republican government could survive disagreement. The early republic would quickly face debt policy, the Whiskey Rebellion, conflicts over Britain and France, fights over banks, arguments over speech and sedition, and the unresolved brutality of slavery. Ratification opened the door, it did not settle the house. For viewers today, the significance is not that every modern dispute has a direct 18th century answer. The surviving evidence and contemporary arguments show that constitutional government began in context, argument, contingency, and imperfect consent. According to the ratification record, the document became operative only because state conventions, including New Hampshire's, decided that the risks of the new plan were preferable to the failures of the old system. Historians still debate how democratic that consent really was, because many people affected by the new republic had no direct political voice. The ninth ratification made the Constitution real enough to test. It also preserved the central legacy question that still gives constitutional history its force. How can a republic create power strong enough to govern, but limited enough to remain free? By the end of June 21st, 1788, that question had a new arena. The United States would no longer be only a loose confederation struggling to act. It would attempt a federal republic under a written constitution, shaped by ratification politics, amendment demands, regional suspicion, and the practical work of creating institutions. New Hampshire did not write the Constitution alone, and it did not complete the Union alone, but its vote supplied the threshold. It turned a plan on paper into a government waiting to be born.